As Churchill and the Navy High Command waited on the brink of despair, information came in from Bletchley Park that offered a glimmer of hope. It was a decrypted order from the Luftwaffe, telling its units to redeploy in order to protect Bismarck as it neared the French port of Brest. Now, the Navy had an inkling of where Bismarck was heading, and they scrambled to put together a plan to stop her.
As the hours ticked on, the chances of finding and catching Bismarck were increasingly unlikely. Searches had been constant. Long-range flying boats scoured thousands of square miles of empty ocean looking for Bismarck. But now, with the information that Bismarck was heading for Brest, they could finally concentrate their search. Then, after over 30 hours of searching, at 10:30 on the 26th of May, Ensign Leonard B. Smith, an American on a Catalina flying boat out of Northern Ireland, spotted a rainbow oil slick on the sea. And then, Bismarck. Smith immediately called in the position. The German was making a decent speed and was just 800 miles from Brest.
It was electrifying news. Bismarck had been found, but the Navy would have to act fast. They calculated Bismarck's speed and bearing and realised that within less than a day, Bismarck would be safely back under the protective air umbrella of Luftwaffe aircraft from Brest. That meant that most of the Royal Navy ships in the Atlantic had no chance of catching her. But the Navy did have one card left to play: Force H.
So Force H is an interesting beast, and it's a really classic example of how you have to improvise in wartime. So if you just track back to 1940, British strategy in the Mediterranean is based around operating with the French. The French are going to cover the Western Mediterranean, the British are going to cover the East, and that's job done. France drops out of the war in the summer of 1940, and the Western Mediterranean is uncovered. So what would have been a French responsibility, the British have to pull together some ships from elsewhere and create a force based on Gibraltar that can operate in the Western Mediterranean and also out into the Atlantic, which is what the French would have done.
Vice Admiral Somerville's Force H was centred around his flagship, the small battle cruiser Renown. She was accompanied by the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and a light cruiser, the Sheffield. So they were now powering north through the Bay of Biscay and on to try to intercept Bismarck.
Force H needed to get their aircraft carrier Ark Royal into a position to launch her torpedo bombers to repeat the attack of a few days before. This time, the Navy was in even more desperate need of success. However, as they drew in to only 70 miles from Bismarck, the Atlantic swell started to grow and the weather closed in. It was now or never. The Swordfish had to be launched, or Bismarck would surely never be caught.
The Swordfish were fitted with new magnetic torpedoes. Then in the early afternoon, with the deck pitching through 55-foot waves and the teeth of a violent gale, 14 Swordfish aircraft lumbered into the sky. They were carrying not only their bombs, but the hopes and expectations of the entire nation.
And we climbed up to about 8,000, 9,000 feet. And although it was blowing hard and there was a big sea running, the weather then the visibility was good. And there was a lot of broken cloud. And we could see the target as we were being led in through gaps in the cloud. And down we went in our dive and turned in to the attack. Now I had my doubts as we went down because I could see the ship and she wasn't firing at us. And I thought, well, that's odd, you know. Previous attacks that I had done, the ship was firing at us in the dive. And as I levelled out on the water, I saw other aircraft dropping their torpedoes. And I looked at the ship and I said, that is a town-class cruiser. I don't know which one, but it is a town-class cruiser, and it had its battle white ensigns up. And so I didn't drop my torpedo. My leader did. He dropped his, but I held on to mine.
The majority had just dropped their torpedoes on HMS Sheffield. The cruiser from Force H that had steamed up with Ark Royal from Gibraltar. It was another colossal error by the Royal Navy.
Well, now, when we got back to the ship, they told us that it was Sheffield, but in the briefing, you see, they never told us that Sheffield had been detached. We didn't know she was there. The signal to detach the Sheffield to shadow the Bismarck was not repeated to Ark Royal.
Fortunately for the Sheffield, the torpedoes either missed or malfunctioned, but it was another horrible mistake. More precious hours wasted in that race to catch Bismarck.
So the clock is ticking now, and you know the odds are starting to stack against the British. The failed attack on Sheffield is a disaster, really, because it just costs time. So what they have to do now is get those strike aircraft back onto Ark Royal, get them down below decks, get new torpedoes on them, get back up again and redeploy the strike force. That all takes a long time to do. You can imagine how frenetic it would have been down in Ark Royal's hangar as each aircraft drops down, getting those new weapons on very quickly. You've got tired aircrew who have already done one mission. But nevertheless, they take the decision they're going to try for one last strike before it gets dark. And really, if it gets dark and they haven't done something significant to slow Bismarck down, the chances of her getting home safely are getting greater and greater if she gets another night steaming.
At 1910, the rearmed Swordfish were launched off a lurching Ark Royal. The battleships that had the best chance of battering Bismarck, Rodney and King George V, were still a distance away and starting to run low on fuel. Rodney could only keep up its pursuit for another 12 hours. King George V radioed Rodney.
Through filthy weather, the Swordfish bore down on their target. It was now or never. In a sign of things to come for naval warfare, one of the most important strikes in the history of the Royal Navy was now being delivered by aircraft.
When the attack actually came, it was in little penny packets of aircraft dropping down through the clouds, finding this German battleship in front of them, and then carrying out their attacks.
We turned in and made our attack down to 90 feet, dropped the fish, turned hard downwind, and jinked all over the sky. And of course the ship itself, you could see all the guns firing at you in a tracer in green, red, orange, white, all coming towards you. Suddenly there were great eruptions of spray going up in the air, and we realized that she was firing her main armament at us in the hope that, you know, they'd drop a shell kind of somewhere near and we'd be swamped by the spray.
The attack by the bombers from Ark Royal succeeded much more than the previous attacks had done. Again, due to luck, but this time luck had shifted in the British direction and away from the Germans. When the bombers first approached, the conditions were very similar to the ones that had stymied Victorious's planes. The weather was rough, Bismarck was free to manoeuvre, so even though she was a large target, she was making it difficult for them, and that very impressive anti-aircraft battery of hers was putting up an awful lot of flak. What is remarkable under the conditions is that 2 torpedoes struck their mark. One, like the previous attack, struck the ship where her anti-torpedo protection was strongest and did no appreciable damage. But the second one was far more effective and far more dangerous for Bismarck. That torpedo hit struck right aft in the vicinity of her propeller and rudders. Now, fortunately for the Germans, the propellers were not damaged by the blast. That could have been even more fatal. But what did happen was that the torpedo struck just as Bismarck was making an evasive turn to port, and it meant that her rudders were now jammed 15 degrees to port. If that damage could not be made good, Bismarck, who was so close to escaping from the pursuing British, was now stuck, only able to steam in circles.
Even in the immediate aftermath of the attack, the identity of the man who dropped the crucial torpedo was unclear. Until recently, it was accepted that Jock Moffat made the decisive strike. But recent research has suggested that in fact the man who disabled Bismarck was Kenneth Patterson.
And as we turned away, my observer, he looked over the side of the aircraft, astern, and saw our torpedo actually running. You could see the wake of it in the sea. And I knew that I'd aimed off for her speed, and as I was in the better position to do the attack, I'm quite sure it was my torpedo.
It was a 1 in a million shot. Bismarck was now helpless, steering in a sweeping circle. They tried to repair the ship, but it was hopeless. Lutjens knew the game was up. The British fleet would be on his position within hours. At 21:40, he radioed his headquarters with Bismarck's position and a statement of defiance.
That night, the crew of Bismarck were allowed to raid the stock cupboards, gorging themselves on ham, tinned pineapple and rum. An announcement was made over the PA. The German people are with you, and we will fight until our gun barrels glow red hot and the last shell has left the barrels. For us seamen, the question is now victory or death.
Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.